regular lectureship in ladies' programs. Of course, we've known her husband for a long time in our lectureship. He's probably been on every one we've had for 10 years. And I just really look forward to having her, although I have not heard her speak. She will be speaking today on how can godly women work in the church. Irene Taylor was born in Idaho, the seventh of 8 children. Graduated from Nampa, Idaho High School and Free Harlan College in Henderson, Tennessee. Married Robert Taylor Jr. in 1952. Mother of 2 children, Rebecca Mrs. Phil Davis of Seminole, Oklahoma, and Tim of Nashville, Tennessee. Is he still single?
He will be
till May. She works in an accounting office and lectures to ladies' classes on various lectureships for Special Ladies' Day. And Irene, if you would like for us to have a prayer before we begin our class, we will go ahead and do that at this time. So would you bow with me, please, as we pray?
It's great to be here, isn't it? I appreciate the introduction very much. I always find it interesting to come to a place when my husband has been there a number of times before me. The reactions that I get always amuse me. I remember one of a little lady that came up to me and she said, "I have heard your husband all my life." And she was in her 90s. I remind him of that every so often. It is good to be here. I have looked forward to this time more than I can tell you. I was supposed to be here last year and I had to change plans, and I was so glad that I wasn't jinxed this year. It's such a pleasure to get to meet new ladies, and one of the blessings of being a Christian is the fact that no matter where you go, when you find Christian people, you're among the finest people in the world. And you always have a family wherever you go. Our daughter is married to a young preacher. And I tell her that remember all the times that when we moved or when we traveled, we never felt isolated. We always had family. And she's finding that to be true. Our topic this morning is a study that I'm sure that you've heard many times. You're not going to hear anything new. That's not my purpose in being here. I have never acquired or tried to present anything new when I'm presenting a Bible lesson. I want to be just as old as the biblical teaching. And when we have to have something new and exciting to keep our interest sparked in matters of religion, we're in trouble. And so the things that you hear this morning is just really going to be a review of the things that you've known all your life. But one of the best things that we can do in Christian teaching is to bring things back to remembrance, and that's biblical. We're told many times that those who taught in early Christian times brought things back to remembrance, and we're commanded to do that. You know, things that we don't review and keep in mind, we have a tendency to forget. Remember all those things that you learned in school that when you reach my vantage point, if you haven't used them, you have forgotten. And that's true in the area of biblical knowledge. And so we're not going to have anything new. We've heard much across the years about women's work in the church, both from the pulpit and in writing. There was a time when churches of Christ had a uniformity of teaching on this point. And isn't it sad that that's not true today? We have become so open-minded that we have what I call holes in our thinking. Some of us are willing to swallow just about anything that comes along. And I always hesitate to say that to a group like this because you are not the caliber that will do that. And the ones that really probably need these lessons the most are the ones that won't come to hear them. Basically because they're really not interested. I like the wording of the topic. How can godly women work in the church? Because you see, there are women who work, who call themselves Christians, but who are not working within the framework that God has outlined. Christian women, godly women won't do that. Godly women are going to work within the framework of God, and they're going to be happy and busy in so doing. We need to only look at the advertisements of denominational people to see the lengths to which we go in the area of women's work in the field of religion. They have elevated and glamorized women's role above and beyond what God had intended for it to be. Probably the prime examples of this is Ellen G. White or Mary Baker Eddy. And yet many denominational groups today use women in roles which God intended solely for the man in the area of religion. And that's sad. But even sadder is the fact that many among us are beginning to clamor for the same thing. You may or may not be aware of an article that was in a bulletin from Houston a few years ago, not so many years really, in which the woman writing the article, apparently with the approval of the eldership, mentioned that the work of women in the church was exactly that of the man, no more and no less. Now let that sink in for a moment. In essence, she was saying that whatever a man can do, a woman can do in the church. The spirit of the Equal Rights Amendment has affected our thinking in the field of religion. You know, if you will just notice, any time a movement begins in the world, sooner or later its influence is going to filter into the church, and sometimes it's sooner rather than later. And though Christian people fought the Equal Rights Amendment, we still have unwittingly allowed much of the philosophy to cunningly enter our thinking. And so we have those who are trying to justify a clamor for equality. And you know, if you think the Equal Rights Amendment is dead, ladies, you're wrong. Eleanor Smeal is once again the president of that organization, and she has vowed that it's going to be revived and become a part of the law. And as you well know, they seemingly have unlimited funds with which to wage their campaign. I mention the Equal Rights Amendment because it could drastically affect the role of the woman in the area of religion. Because you see, the law would, in essence, allow for a loss of the tax-exempt status of churches unless they allowed women to do the very same thing as men. Now, for those of us who are interested in doing what is right and pleasing God, that presents no problem. We would still do what God tells us to do. But for those whose convictions are not that strong, this threat would be all that it would take for them to justify allowing women into the roles that we know are for men only. And so we want to be busy teaching what the real work of women in the church is. We're going to examine first some of the things which the role is and some things which it is not, and then we're going to look at some examples of women who were busy doing God's work. We're told, first of all, in 1 Timothy 2:8, that it is the men who are to pray, lifting holy hands. And I'm told by those who make a study of the Greek language that the word man here is not generic as is often true in biblical teaching, but it is specific, indicating without doubt that women are not to lead in public prayer. This would make wrong the current trend toward chain prayers in public assemblies and classes. I'm so proud to hear that, thank you. I'm challenged occasionally when I make that statement, and so I appreciate that support. We have those who today say, but men gave us permission to. Now, ladies, let me tell you something. There's not a man living on God's green earth, my husband included, who has the right to give me permission to do something that God says I should not do. And so I don't care if we took a poll of every man in the auditorium and secured their permission for me to stand out there and speak to a mixed assembly. God hasn't given me that permission. And we ought to be more concerned with what God has given us permission to do than with what man has given us permission to do. It's a serious problem. This is the reason that I have for years discouraged Bible class teachers of young children from permitting the girls to lead in class prayers as well as the boys. We're reaping the result of that practice right now. And you know, when you first, I always do that. When we first began objecting, we were told, well, they're little. It doesn't hurt. But it did hurt. And so now some of these who are clamoring for the chain prayer situation are those who grew up having the right of leading prayer in the children's mixed class. And ladies, it's not far from the seat where the chain prayer is given to the rostrum and leading in a public prayer in the General Assembly. Let's not become involved in a dangerous practice which leads to an outright violation of God's law. Immediately after admonishing the women to dress modestly, to be more concerned about the inner beauty than the outward beauty, Paul states, let the women learn in silence with all subjection. But I suffer not a woman to teach nor to usurp authority over the man. Why do we object to that? Why do we really object to the idea of subjection, of submission? Why have we listened, whether we intended to or not, to those who say that makes us second class? The Lord himself was in subjection to someone. Do we think we're better than the Lord, that we're above being in subjection and submission? We'll talk a little bit more about that later. I want to read you verbatim a quote from a book by an author on the book of 1st and 2nd Timothy. Now, I'll let you in on a little secret. I recommend this book without reservation. Can you guess who wrote it? But my husband makes this comment. Her realm is that of quietness, her position that of submission. Paul does not suffer or permit the woman to teach or to usurp authority over the man. Her role is that of silence. It is quite obvious, therefore, that she would be in violation of this injunction were she to be a public preacher with both men and women present, a Bible teacher of a mixed class of both men and women, an elder, a deacon, a song director, a prayer leader, or an officiant at the Lord's table. Well, let me just insert here that there are congregations who are now using women to serve at the Lord's table. That's not in the future, that's in the now. Any teaching she does must not be over the man or a usurpation of his role. This is God's counsel. It is not Pauline prejudice in manifested form as liberalism now contends and the women's movement advocates. Two reasons are assigned for this: the priority of man in creation and the deception in Eve. It is true that when both sinned in Eden, but Eve was the one deceived. And ladies, when we argue with these truths, we're arguing with God, and that's serious business. We want to keep in mind that this role that God has given to woman is not a role of which we should be ashamed, but it is a role of protection. And I wonder why we women have failed to see this. Those of you who are elders' wives, and those of you who are preachers' wives, know exactly what I'm saying when I say, I am thankful to God that I'm not a man. When church problems come, I don't have to wrestle with the bottom line, serious consideration of solving those problems. Even though they affect me, and even though I'm concerned about them, I have the protection of knowing that the men have that responsibility. I wouldn't trade places with them for the world. And I can see more and more God's wisdom in giving that role to the man, because whether we like to admit it or not, ladies, we are more emotional in our decisions than are the men. And as the lesson of the previous hour showed, emotions in the realm of religion can be dangerous. And so God's wisdom shines here, as in all other areas. My husband has often stated his strong conviction that there is no error that has ever arisen or ever will arise that has not been addressed by inspiration. And the more I study the Bible, the more I realize the truthfulness of that statement. And when we think about the teaching of the woman's role in the church, we can see that here in this area, inspiration has given us the answer if we'll just accept it. Some of the prime examples of women working in the church exemplify the beauty of working in the role as God would have us to function. And we need to be extremely careful, ladies, that we listen to the right source for our inspiration. Let's be careful that we go to the Bible, and let's turn a deaf ear to the philosophy of the women's movement, of the Equal Rights Amendment, of those even in the church who are not contented with their role. And I don't know if you agree with this observation or not, but it seems to me that those in the church who are clamoring so strongly for change are those who are misfits in their role. And though I sympathize with those who have had problems in the home and in marriage, I'm not about to let them be the standard by which I operate. And we need to be careful to whom we listen. One of the finest examples of Christian woman at work is Priscilla. I love this lady. Every time she is mentioned, she's mentioned with her husband. And I think that is a beautiful picture. And it's a beautiful tribute. Priscilla and Aquila working together were a team that just could not be taught. And Priscilla always worked side by side with her husband. And even in the case of teaching Apollos, she didn't overstep her role. You know as well as I that this is an example that many go to for justification that women can have a public role, that they can teach publicly. But they've missed the key significant words that inspiration placed there to tell us that this is not so. The Bible tells him aside. Not in the assembly, but they took him aside, very likely to their home. Although the Bible doesn't specifically tell us that. But we do know that it was a private setting. And in a private setting, she worked side by side with her husband. We have no hint that Priscilla ever discouraged her husband in doing church work. And I want to just inject a few words here to the preacher students' wives, and if the rest of you want to listen in, you're welcome. As a preacher's wife, when I speak to a group which includes those from a training school for preachers, I like to talk to their wives just a few moments. I wish I had time to talk to you at length. But ladies, there is a beauty in being a preacher's wife. And don't you forget it. Your attitude is going to do much to determine how your family and the congregation view your husband's work. Now we hear those yelling for a role with power. We women have been given that role and we have sense enough to use it. And this is definitely true in the role of elders' wives and preachers' wives. When we belittle our husband, whether it's public or private, we really are saying more about ourselves than we are about him. And I know of a case that so sadly resulted in the preacher having to be dismissed simply because of the constant tirade that his wife did every time he tried to teach the ladies' Bible class, every time they were out in a public setting. It just seemed to delight her to embarrass him and put him down and belittle him. And I was appalled. I wanted to ask that woman, who chose your husband? Why did you marry a preacher if you were going to feel this way? And I want to ask preachers' wives across the nation, why did you marry a preacher? Some say, well, I didn't marry him when he was a preacher. He changed afterwards. Well, you ought to love him enough to support him, whether he's a garbage truck collector or whether he's a preacher. Let your attitude be right. And there's another reason for this. Your children's attitude toward their daddy's work is going to be greatly affected by your attitude. You're the key to the happiness in that home. You're the key that strikes the note for the song in that home. And if your attitude is wrong, if you resent your role as a preacher's wife and the demands that it's made upon your time and his, your children are going to feel that resentment, and it's going to become a part of their lives, and they're going to have problems. It's going to come out in an adverse way. And then your children are going to be branded as those preachers' brats. And you're going to be largely responsible. Sure, there are going to be demands made upon your time, and your husband's especially. And sometimes those demands are unreasonable, and sometimes you have to sit down and be firm and say, I have a responsibility to my family. I don't run a free taxi service. I'm not on call 24 hours a day. I don't leave my children when they're sick. And I don't leave my children constantly with a babysitter to be reared by them rather than me. God gave me that responsibility, and ladies, it's my God-given church work. If I neglect my family to do for everybody else, I need not be surprised when my family is lost. And you won't always make people popular when you take that stand, but you owe it to your family. Now let's balance it on the other side. You also want to be an example to the women in the congregation to do your part. But You know, I never felt like I did what I did because I was a preacher's wife. I did it because I was a Christian woman. And I never taught our children that this is right or this is wrong because you're the preacher's children. Somebody might be watching you. No, I didn't teach that. I said this is right or wrong because you're a Christian. And I'm grateful that they don't resent their daddy's work. They're proud of it. Your attitude and your approach is going to largely determine how your children feel. You remember the story that was told and appeared in many bulletins about the preacher who, during a meeting, gave a marvelous lesson on evangelism and personal work. And he made the statement in that lesson to the effect that there was no excuse for anybody not becoming actively involved in the direct working of the personal work or evangelistic program. And this bothered the young woman who invited him into her home after the service. And as they were talking after the meal, she asked him about his statement, and she reminded him of the passage in 1 Samuel 30 and 34, which says in essence that whereas his share is who goes down into battle, so also shall his share be who stays home with the baggage. And she said, I feel like I'm doing my part of the Lord's work when I stay at home and take care of my family and relieve my husband to go and do the personal work. And she had a point. We don't want to use our families as an excuse, as sometimes we do. But we don't want to neglect them either. They're precious. God gave them to you as a tremendous opportunity. And we want to be sure that we do our part. You know, I've always felt like, and I tell people that I don't get out as much as my husband does. But I've always felt that I was a partner in his work. And I don't say that braggingly. But when I keep his clothes clean and ready to go, and he comes in at midnight one night and takes off the next morning, that takes some doing sometimes. When I relieve him of the little trivial things that I can do to relieve him to do the things that he needs to do that I can't do, I feel like I have just as much a part in his work as he does. I think this is the way Priscilla and Aquila worked together as a team. And he may be the one who has his name on the lectureship programs and on the brotherhood papers and the articles and things. But on my record, I hope in heaven I'm listed as a partner in his work. Where did we get the idea that we have to be at the public forefront before we're doing church work? In the second part of our study of examining those women who did God's work, we just have to take a look at Dorcas. As Christian women, we are told to be full of good works. Now, I know it's not exclusive to women, but it is inclusive of women. And in the passage which directs the widows who are widows indeed, we're told, they are told specifically to be known for their good works. Dorcas is an example of this. Now, where did she do her good church work? It wasn't necessarily the church building. We've gotten the idea somehow that if we don't do it at the church building, it's not church work. But that's not so. The best church work we do is not at the church building. Dorcas had compassion on those who were less fortunate. And at her death, the widows mourned her passing, and they showed the good works that she had done. Her benevolent spirit shined forth. And I never read the account of Dorcas' life, but what I ask myself, a sobering question. If, as I lay in the casket, my children were to choose a symbol of my life to reflect the kind of life that I've lived, what kind of symbol would they choose? Dorcas' friends chose to display the many garments that she had made, which indicated her benevolent spirit. What would your children choose? It's sobering. We need to be known for our kind, benevolent, good works. And like Mary of Bethany, we need to be ready to hear Jesus. You say, is that a church work? You better believe it is. There are times, ladies, when we neglect to put first things first. And the choice that we make in life is not always that choice between good and bad. That's perhaps the easier of the choices that we make. The real difficulty comes when we have to choose that which is good over that which is better. You've chosen that this morning. I don't have to go down the line and told each of you ladies this morning to know that everyone in this classroom had something that you could have been doing this morning that was good, but you chose to be here and do the better. And that's what Mary chose. Was it wrong for Martha to prepare the meal? To be concerned about the serving? Well, absolutely not. We have to eat. And they had a guest in their home, and she was just being hospitable. That in and of itself was not wrong. What was wrong then? Why did the Lord reprimand her? Because she chose that at a time when she should have been at Jesus' feet. And the Lord was not being unfair in reprimanding her, as one lady wrote an article and charged. That's not so. I find that to be comparable to the lady who invites the preacher home for Sunday dinner but has to stay home from Sunday school class or preaching and prepare the meal. Any preacher worth his salt would have much rather had cheese and crackers than have another service. In fact, I know a preacher that was with us in a meeting one time where that happened, and he refused to go eat dinner with the lady after she prepared it. He said, I won't be guilty of eating the meal that kept you from the worship service. And I really admire him. We need to remember that there is a time for more important things than the everyday necessities of life. And this is what the Lord was pointing out to Mary. The great businessman J.C. Penney has made the statement one time that if we have too much business to attend a worship service, we have too much business. And to that I say amen. We're all busy people. We're too busy. But we ought to stop and ask ourselves, busy doing what? You know, I use this illustration, but I think it makes the point. Friday is garbage day in our neighborhood. You're a jump ahead of me already. We have a lot of dogs in our neighborhood, and they are the busiest creatures on Friday you ever saw. But if you think I'm going to stand here and tell you it's constructive, you're wrong. And much of what we do is really not all that constructive as pertains to our Christian life. We'd be better off without a lot of the activities in which we engage that take us away from our responsibility to the Lord. And so when we say, I'm too busy to do this good work or that good work, ask yourself, busy doing what? For lack of time, we're going to skip over some of the others because I want to hurriedly discuss a few things about the elect lady. In the second chapter of, in the second John rather, not the second chapter, there's only one chapter. But in 2 John, we have a brief portrait of a beautiful lady. We don't even know her name. She's just called the elect lady. And if you have your Bible, turn there with me. We won't take time to read all of it, but there are a few points that I think we need to observe in relationship to the work that godly women can do. In the opening verse, Paul gives a salutation to this lady, and there are some key phrases in that verse. The elect, or the elder, and to the elect lady and her children, whom I love in the truth, and not only I, but also all they that have known the truth. Hey, wouldn't that be a beautiful tribute to be written about you and me? That we are loved and known in the truth. Because of our love and our stand for the truth, we're known and we're loved. And then, later in the passage over in verse 4, there is a tribute paid to this lady and her children. He says, I greatly rejoice that I have found thy children walking in the truth, as we have received a commandment from the Father. What more would we want said of our role as mother than that our children are in the truth? If you, as a Christian mother, have reared faithful children, let me assure you, you are a success. You're not a failure. And you may be out in the business world, but there'll never be an accomplishment that you make in the business world. And I say this having filled those roles. There's never a satisfaction or accomplishment in the business world that will anywhere meet the satisfaction that you have in rearing Christian children. And this lady had accomplished that. And then there's another admonition that's given in that passage that I think we need to really take note of. He's warning her not to extend hospitality to false teachers. And we have this open-minded, tolerant attitude in the church today which says, I love you in spite of your trouble. I love you in spite of your error. And in essence, we pat them on the back as though everything is all right and bid them Godspeed. John warned the elect lady not to do that. And if it's wrong for her, why is it not wrong for us? Well, it is, because we're told elsewhere not to bid Godspeed to those who are in error. And it's dangerous today. We have individuals as well as churches, as well as schools, who are bidding Godspeed to those who are teaching error. And it's causing tremendous problems in the church. Why do I mention all of these things in connection with women's work in the church? You may have expected me to come here and talk about doing the bulletin, doing the visitation of the sick, baking things for those who are in need, preparing the Lord's Supper, and all these things that we all know that we can do, and that most of us are doing. I felt that was secondary to what I wanted to talk to you about. Because you see, if we are involved in the right attitudes, in trying to uphold the truth, then these things are going to fall into place. And in the attitude and the atmosphere that we have in the church today, we need to appoint ourselves as committee of one to uphold those who are teaching sound doctrine. We need to hold up the hands of the elders who are taking a stand against that which is wrong in the church. There's many a lonely night for the elder and his family and the preacher and his family. And they need to know of your love and your encouragement. You need to be an Aaron and hold up the hand of Rome. It's a serious thing, ladies, to bid Godspeed to those who are teaching error. We need to keep in mind that we women have within our hands the power to be a part of the solution to the problems facing the church. Well, now, how in the world can that be, since we're not elders and not in the decision-making of the activities of the congregation? Well, simply this. If you and I determine, ladies, that we're going to be as strong and as faithful and as dedicated a Christian woman as we possibly can be, that we're going to train, not just teach, train. There is a vast difference there. We're going to train our children to the very best of our ability to be the same dedicated, faithful type of Christian. How long do you think it will be before we can turn around some of these problems within the church? Think about it for a moment. It is said that we're always only a generation away from apostasy, and that's true. Why can't we be a generation away from pulling the church back on the right path? You and I can do it. And there's no power on the face of the earth that I would want any more than that kind of power. It's frightening. It's a tremendous responsibility, but it's a golden opportunity. God's given it to you and to me. And if we will do this kind of church work, look at the good and the growth that will result in the church. And you and I can be responsible for that change. We're in position to do it when the men are not. You have within your power the ability to train the elders and the preachers of tomorrow. You can make a difference. The question is, will we? And that's the challenge that I want to leave with you, is that I will hereby determine to renew my efforts to do that which is right, to be an influence for good, and to help solve the problems of the church. You say, I don't have influence. Oh, yes, you do. Everyone has influence. The question is, will it be good or will it be bad? And with those thoughts in mind, I'd like for us to bow for a brief closing prayer. Our Father in heaven, we're thankful to thee for the opportunity to be a Christian woman in thy service. We thank thee for the protection and the love that thou hast given to us, for the opportunities that thou hast placed within our hands. And we pray now for the willingness and the wisdom to use our abilities in our role to thy glory, that we might be able to influence the church back toward the right path, and that we might influence the world